And it's, one doesn't need a lot of urging to come to this part of Maine, right? And any time of the year. We actually had breakfast sitting in front of the Nubble Lighthouse. So, come on. There are worse things for sure. So my name is Deanna David. My brand is Ribbon Candy Hooking. It's a new brand. Maybe we're headed toward 4 years old at the new year. But it's a busy brand, and I'm based in Bethany, where my studio is, in Connecticut. But some of you maybe watch, I have a very big YouTube channel, and I do a live show 3 times a week. Wednesdays at noon, Mondays at noon, and Fridays in the evening at 7 Eastern Standard Time. And we just talk about rugs and rug history. It's been a lot of fun. I have about 1,000 videos online too for beginners. I don't think there's any beginners here, but there's a lot of different content online, and it's been busy. It's been a busy few years. So in this past year, I was working on a couple of book projects that will lead into today's presentation. My first book was for Fox Chapel. That's not what we're doing today, but it was a rug making book about 12 different kinds, forms, or techniques for making rugs. And I'm going to brag and say it was #1 in crafts on Amazon for like 3 months. So not just the rug making category, but the craft category. And I was very pleased with that because rug making is not a very well-known hobby anymore. And I thought for us as rug makers to have a book that kind of transcends other crafts, including cooking, is incredible. So I was very happy with that. But I have just finished working on my second book this past year, and this book is for Rug Hooking Magazine, so Ampre Press. And the subject of this talk and the subject of that book is based on a series of classes that I do over Zoom, mostly for rug hookers and punchers. But the classes are called Design Like, and then Design Like who? Design like any artist you can think of. Every month it's somebody different. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Good. So, for example, Design Like, I'm going to show you one, and you shout out who you think the maker is designing like. Now, I just want to preface that by saying it's not copying something, right? Because many artists are copyright free because of the age of their work and the span of their lives. But this book and these classes are about figuring out what specific artists do, like their tropes, their tricks, their magic, and capturing that, right? So not copying the image outright, which you often can just do, but actually figuring out what is it about, for example, a Matisse, that when you look at it, you go, oh, that's a Matisse. You just know, right? That's what the classes are about. That's what the book is about. The book comes out in January, by the way. So the rugs that I'm showing you in person and the rugs that are part of the slideshow are in the book, and actually nobody has seen them yet, not even on my channel, except for the people who made them. I only made a couple, and then I shouted out to my viewers and my audience to make a bunch more. I couldn't possibly do 30, 40, 50 rugs for this book. So other people helped me. But I did the designs for all of them. So I'm going to show you one, and you say, I think they were designing like which artist? Van Gogh. Yeah. That's it. So you can see that immediately. Yeah. And why do you think that's so obvious? The swirly sky, right? It's the starry, starry night. But it's not just that, is it? It's the colors too. Right? Because Van Gogh always loved to work the color wheel and do the blues with the yellows and the oranges. So that's his thing. There are Van Gogh paintings that are not done in that color palette, but there's not a lot, right? And there's more than one starry night. He did tons of starry nights. He was a little bit, he had some problems, right? He had a few problems. But he was a very independent Dutchman, and he traveled by foot all the time, and he spent a lot of time sitting on riverbanks at night with his famous straw hat and a bunch of candles sticking out of the straw, right? What a fire hazard that is, right? Death wish. Looking out and painting many starry nights. So, for example, Robin LaForest of Wisconsin hooked this one. This isn't in the presentation, but it's certainly in the book. And the reason I designed it like this is because I had to include the Starry Night. I left it up to her to decide, and we can pass this around, or I can put them up here for later. I know some of you are working. Maybe should we just look at them later? Mm-hmm. Does that make the most sense? We can look at them later together. I left it up to her to choose her colors. And I didn't want to helicopter and micromanage, but I'm very glad that she did the blues, the yellows, and the oranges, because that really helps identify it. The reason I've made this design the way it is did you know that Van Gogh's father was a minister? They were very, very, very liberal, equivalent of like Unitarian, but in the Netherlands in the 1800s. Very liberal. And one of the things about Van Gogh's life that was so interesting, and I think very kind of important, was that there was another Vincent van Gogh who was born to his parents who died in infancy, and they were very, very sorry about the loss of that child, but they put up a headstone for that child in the parish right next to the house by which Vincent van Gogh, who we know, would walk by 100 times a day in the cemetery. First gravestone in the cemetery said Vincent van Gogh. And right, so that would do something to you mentally. So this image is the actual church where his dad worked and lived, and some of the stones in front, including his stone. So that's the way that this series works. It's all about choosing artists. Some of them have to be famous artists like Van Gogh, because that's what draws people in. But with this book series, I actually have the second one ready as well. But as I say, the first one should be coming out in January. I'm trying to choose artists who are both very iconic and well-known and beloved, but I'm also trying to find artists who nobody has heard of, right? Because there's fun in that too, learning something new. So I'm going to start the slideshow presentation with an artist who maybe you haven't heard of yet, but you might fall in love with, right? And this is an artist who is also out of copyright. So just as a reminder, if you like Van Gogh, you can hook anything Van Gogh, right? It's all out of copyright. This next artist is named Hilma af Klint, right? So maybe you haven't heard of her yet. She is a Swedish artist of the Victorian period. Have you heard of her? She's right, very, not everybody has heard of her, and she is phenomenal. So let me ask you this as we start the slideshow. I know many of you are hooking, as you should. Do you want me to shut the lights off for slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And secondly, where is the light switch? Oh, is it over here? The artist I want to talk about, I just want to tell you a little bit about her life before we go too far. This is Hilma af Klint. Yep. Sorry, it's a little bit, I had to put it up like this for, clarity. So, Hilma is born in Sweden in 1862, and her life spans pretty much the entire Victorian period. So, in the Victorian period, I'm sure that you know this and you've heard this, but this is a period where people were very interested in forging a connection between the spiritual world and earth, right? Think about books like Frankenstein. Think about how many people in the Victorian period loved having seances, right? This was a moment in time where it was very fashionable and popular, interesting to think about how to reach other worlds. And also with, the young sort of age of death, average age of death, people lost a lot of people, family members all the time, and the idea of being able to reach them again was very exciting, right? So she gets I wish it was a little bit bigger, but you can see it's a beautiful photo of her as a young woman. Her life is kind of like, do you remember that song, Windmills of Your Mind, right? Round like a circle in a spark, like all of the shapes, right? Her life was like that. She constantly dreamed of shapes, literally. And she attended a lot of seances, like every night. This was a great hobby for her. She was an upper class person. And when she was at one seance, she was at Gripsholm Castle, which is in Sweden, and it's on an island. She was at the seance, and she actually heard, this is the story, her sister calling her. And she panicked because she was expecting to hear a voice, but not her sister's. and she had to take multiple conveyances, including a boat, to get back home. It took her 2 days to get home, and her sister died about 2 seconds later. So she always believed that her sister was calling her, and that she had this psychic ability that was similar to that of like a medium, right? So when she was involved in seances, when she slept, when she napped, she was a very, very healthy eater. There was nothing about her that was particularly strange. She loved mysticism. So she was always trying to figure out a way to record what she saw in her dreams and while she was in a seance kind of medium state. And her solution was to do these incredible paintings. This is a quote from her. "Those granted the gift of seeing more deeply can see beyond form and concentrate on the wondrous aspect hiding beneath every form, which is called life." That's a great quote, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. So she creates pieces, Childhood, 1906, filled with shapes, right? Remember that spirograph toy, right? Filled with shapes. This is a series, Childhood, 1907. She does youth, she does old age, she does all kinds of stuff. It's very abstract. Hold on just a second. So, she herself is kind of coasting through life thinking, what are all these images in my mind? What do they mean? Are they proof that there is another world out there that we can reach? She believed that they were, but in her lifetime, nobody else did. And a couple of things about her work, which is so remarkable. Let me show you a little bit more. One of the things that she was very interested in her life, she had a female partner, by the way, and her female partner was called Thomasine, right? So this at that time was not a very popular lifestyle. But Thomasine was a nurse, and in being a nurse, she had access to scientific equipment, and she let Hilma look down the microscope quite a few times at slides of plant life and mold and organic matter, and she saw stuff that looked just like her paintings. All these weird round shapes intersecting. It was very exciting to her and further proof. One of the things, maybe because of her lifestyle that at that time was difficult, that she was the most interested in was the idea of dualities. Everybody having more than one nature, right? We have so many splits, inside of ourselves. No matter who we are, there are parts that are for the public, there are parts that are private, there are parts we hide, there are parts we share, there are parts we like about ourselves, there are parts we hate about ourselves. And she was very interested in the idea of dark versus light. Look at these two paintings. They're both called The Swan. These are she's got hundreds of paintings. These are examples, 1914. You see how the color changes, and it's almost like an Escher in the way that it interlocks. And then this one a little bit later, 1915, still interested in dark versus light. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, and really something. And I'm going to end on, because we have a lot of artists to talk about. This is an amazing story, and this is however you feel about spiritualism, this part of the story is true. At the end of her life, she had been met with so much failure and rejection and ridicule. Not just rejection, but ridicule. For her art. Her paintings are like bigger than a door, right? She's been lugging these paintings around Europe for literally her whole life into her 40s and 50s. And ridicule, right? She's bringing them to spiritualist places and saying, what do you think it means? Talking to experts, everyone thinks it's a joke. So at the end of her life, she packed up her paintings, she burnt most of her notebooks, and she wanted to hide everything. And let me just make sure the next slide is cued. These are her notebooks. She did often notebooks in trances, and she did a lot of automatic writing, right, when you're in a trance and you just draw. She burnt most of her notebooks, she hid her paintings, and then she went to sleep one night, and this is well recorded in her notebook. She had a dream, and the dream said to her, I'm going to choke myself up because it's so good. The dream said to her, in the dream, a voice said, you have got to prepare your paintings for an exhibition in the future, in the far future, because right now people are not ready for your work. And you need to put together an exhibit. So she took out a notebook, and and the main part of the dream said, and prepare your paintings for an exhibit that is shown on a spiral. Your paintings will be hanging on a coil. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Guggenheim.
That's it. That's what happened. Her paintings were put away for decades. Upon her will, her nephew, because she had no children, took them out. They were at the Guggenheim in 1994.
Wow.
On a spiral. Just like she said, right? Look it. I mean, is that amazing? It's all recorded, right? This part is all recorded. This was a very big exhibit. She's becoming much better known now, but in her lifetime, no success.
That's so sad.
Yeah, it's such a classic story, isn't it? So with this chapter, my design is called, what is it called? Seance in the Garden. So this is the line drawing I did, and this is the finished rug. It's a small rug, but this is one you can look at later. It's based on her automatic drawings and her dreams from her seances. And this is hooked by Linda Schultes Hoffman. I forget what part of the country she lives in, but she hooked it with lots of different crazy materials. It is, isn't it pretty? And it could be done very, very large too. I could see this even being done as a Rio rug or a latch hook rug, something really enormous. But what I'm trying to do with the design is capture all those circles within the spirals, because that was always part of her mind. So we're going to move away from her and look at the next artist. I wanted to include her because I think she's just a wonderful story about a person who at this moment is not super well known, but hopefully will be better known as time goes on. Now, I think you're going to know this person, Marc Chagall. Definitely better known, right? So, quote from Marc Chagall, I had only to open my bedroom window and blue air, love, and flowers entered with her. Isn't that great? I mean, this is Chagall, right, in the middle of his life, self-portrait 1968. I don't know if these are these clear enough? Can you see them clearly? Like that's a lot, right? Yeah. His life eclipsed both world wars. He was thrown into a tailspin and forced to leave Europe twice because he was a Russian Jew. So, I mean, talk about unlucky timing, right? Not to minimize it. Despite how crazy and frantic his life was, he created over 10,000 paintings. Wow. That's remarkable. So his life spans towards, he was actually banned from art school as a young man. He grew up in a part of Russia that is now Belarus. He was banned from art school because he was Jewish. And his mother bribed somebody with money because she owned the neighborhood store. He lived in one of these Jewish villages that was called a shtetl, right? They were everywhere before the Holocaust, right? All of these small Jewish villages within Russia. His mother was a very successful businesswoman with the country store, essentially, of her town. She bribed somebody to take him to school in St. Petersburg, which is what he did. And even though he was allowed to be there, he was constantly getting beat up, almost within an inch of his life, because he was Jewish. Now, his dad worked in a fish market, and his dad, this is kind of a weird reversal, didn't have a lot of money. It was the mother who was really the breadwinner. So this is just an odd dynamic. He always said that his mother was a very happy woman who was always looking to smile and joke, but his father was very, very, very depressed. So polar opposites within the house, right? So so he does go to art school, and then he goes to Paris. I'm not going to talk about his entire biography because he does have a great love of his life, Bella, right? And that's the part of his story that anchors him. She is with him always, from the time that they're children until the time that she dies, actually when they escaped Europe to come to New England, and she died on Cranberry Lake in, well, that's New York, isn't it? Cranberry Lake, during the Second World War. The war was just declared over, and she was sick, and they couldn't get her medicine because all the servicemen were coming home, and nobody but the servicemen were allowed access. So his wife died of a very bad cold. I mean, it's just awful. He lost her then, but she continues to be the inspiration of his entire life, right? He marries again, like as an older man, because he wants the company. But Bella is in all of most of his paintings, if not all. This is him here. This is Paris when he was a young man. He spent so much time in Paris. He loved bohemian Paris. He loved the atmosphere. He loved how liberal it was, but he could not wait to get home. He was a homebody. He wasn't somebody who hung out in cafes and drank absinthe, right? That was not him. He's very conservative, very devout, not just religious, but devout, very anxious to come back home to Bella, which he eventually did. So in his paintings, he shows us a lot of small Russian villages. And this will carry on through his entire life because he basically spends his entire life being homesick because he has to keep leaving, right? He has to keep leaving. At one point, he opens an art school right near Vitebsk, right, his little village, and then the Second World War breaks out, so he has to go again. There's not a lot of continuity for him, but in his work, he's always using images. He's such a loving person. He's always using images of love, him and Bella again, against a village background. Here, the cock or the rooster is fertility, right, and reproduction, life going on, right? This is a big theme for him. Will life go on after all of this? Well, he hopes that it will, and he keeps putting roosters in his work. And this is Bella as a ghostly bride, right here. So that's 1980, that was well after her death. So he's constantly in his life using symbolism of the village where he grew up. Some of the symbolism that we often see within Chagall, the flying fish, we see a lot of flying fishes, maybe not in these two, but that represents his dad, right, working at the fish market. That's a sort of souvenir of his dad. Horses represent freedom, being able to just get out and get away. Circus scenes, he does a whole series of circus scenes represent joy and play and that theater part of life. Candlesticks to him represent the Jewish faith, right, and how that can sustain you. So we tend to see a lot of images over and over. He has his own language, and it's a very easy code to crack. There's another character who we often see in Marc Chagall's work. The one on the right is a little bit rougher. He does a lot of religious work because he is so religious. He's Jewish, but he does a lot of stuff with Jesus, the crucifixion, New and Old Testament scenes. He's very, very, very interested in religion. One of the interesting things, right, let me show you first. This is the character I'm talking about. This is called Over Vitebsk, 1913, so is the character that is known through literature as the Wandering Jew, right? Obviously, I'm not making that up. We've all heard that expression. So here he is here. Here he is here. He pops up in many of Chagall's paintings. And you know what's so interesting about that to me? The Wandering Jew represents the plight of his people, right? The man with no home and nowhere to go, who puts his life on his back and just takes off. Do you know who else was living and not knowing each other, but the same exact timeline in Russia through the years of Chagall's life? Is the Yiddish writer called Shalem Aleichem, who wrote, guess what book? Dee-dee-dee-dee, right? Fiddler on the Roof. And that's exactly what that's about too. Their lives paralleled each other. And isn't that interesting? Because that was something that was on his mind too, was the plight of the people. So for Chagall, and the chapters of the book for Rug Cooking Magazine have a lot of history. But I also use in the chapters not just my own design, my own pattern that has been articulated, but work of other people that I have found that looks like, for example, Chagall, right? Because there's actually a lot. I spent about a year or more looking for work online and all over the place to figure out who was working in styles that were similar to the artists that I was about to feature. So I did the Chagall, and I haven't finished the edges yet. That's classic me. Let me show you. Oh, you can see the design first. So I've got, this is my drawing, and instead of having the horse, right, the symbol of freedom, I put the sheep, which I think is the symbol of rug hookers. So I've got a character on a sheep with a horse here, right, a very Chagall-esque horse, very cubist breakdown of the sky. He dabbled in cubism. It wasn't his thing, but he dabbled in it. And on the horse, I've got a female character that reminds me of the days when I was younger and I did a degree in theater costume. So I did a lot. My specialty was like Tudor costume. So I have kind of a Tudor character there. And instead of being over a Russian shtetl, it is over a New England village. So this is my piece here. And we can look at that, nope, like this, one more time. We can look at it closer up. Yeah, would you add? And can you do a little round? Can you do a little round with it too, just so people can see a little? I mean, not that it's like the most. I'm not the best rug hooker, but I do love designing. And you know, some of the things about this particular piece. Some of the things about this piece that I think were interesting. Hooking it. I'm always looking for different materials to hook with. I'm not a traditional hooker, right? I'm more of a thrifty hooker. So for the background of that piece, I used a challis scarf. Remember challis, the material challis?
I'm busy.
Oh.
I should have turned it off.
Sorry, yeah, that was bad timing. I used for the red background a series of challis scarves. They were very popular in the 80s and 90s. They look like paisley, but they're made of either wool or acrylic, and I just cut them up with scissors, and they hook just like paisley, because they're a little transparent. So yeah, I used the challis. I was struggling with the church, so I ended up dip dyeing to pop the church, and then you'll see in her sleeve, I mixed some metallic yarn, mohair yarn, into the sleeve. So using different materials to give it a little bit of a different look, different areas, different pop. So we can look at them closer up as well. Thank you, and taking it around, so you can see it in the back row too. Of the artist being actually a rug hooker.
I know who that is.
Who do you think it is?
Daphne.
It's Magdalena.
Oh, Magdalena.
Yep. But you gave me an idea for the next one. So this chapter that I'm talking about, and I just picked random chapters, right? Because I've written about 40 chapters, and the first 15 are in the book that comes out in January, and then there'll be other ones later. Magdalena Briner is a well-known name to many rug hookers, right? She is one of, if not the earliest rug hooker, dating back to the 1860s, who we can say she was a rug hooker, and these are her pieces, right? And a lot of unknown pieces we can't attribute. So this is Magdalena. I was lucky, there is already a book by Kathy Wright on Magdalena, and that came out years ago, but the family has since found some new photos of her, and I was very lucky to be in touch with the family, and they gave me some new photos. So it's not like a repeat of photography from the other book. This is a great photo of Magdalena and examples of her work, right? If you can't picture her, she worked very primitively, very wide cut, cutting strips with scissors, using material that was around her in that true, original Victorian way, right? And one of her sisters worked in a mental hospital. And this is awful, but when people passed away, or when they were admitted, whatever they brought with them, they would get rid of because they would permanently be in a white gown, right, like Bedlam style. Yeah, I mean, it's awful, but it's the way it worked, you know, in mental hospitals in the 1800s. So she was able to take all that clothing, and it was a good source of clothing to make rugs. And, you know, there are no quotes from Magdalena because she didn't know that she would be famous, right? So I took an excerpt from a poem by Laura Cozy Lanick called Handmade Rugs. And it goes like this.
constructing a rug out of love, memories, old stained clothes, and torn sheets tangled in time like broken promises. So it's haunting, isn't it? So this is the very style that she worked in. Torn sheets, old clothing, stained stuff, her brother's army uniforms from the Civil War, right? This is the stuff that she could get her hands on, and this is the stuff that she used. These are examples of her work. There's so much to say about Magdalena. I don't even know where I put my sheets. Do I even need my sheets? Here they are. You know, Magdalena is what is an, we're saying she's an artist now, but at the time she was a person who made rugs for the house. She married and her husband died almost immediately by drinking water and getting like cholera or something like that, immediately. She had no children, and she was in this rare, awkward, awful situation as a young woman where she had to move back to the family farm, and she was kind of a superfluous woman, right? She didn't really have duties because everyone else living there was married or had a husband or had children. So the best that she could do was help, which is what she did, which probably made for a rather, hopefully not, but possibly sad, incomplete life, maybe a little unfulfilling. But she did have spare time, which other women of that time would not have had, right? She didn't have a lot of things that must get done by her. So as a result, she was able to make tons of rugs in her lifetime. She's an artist who wouldn't have seen art, right? This is rural, this is Dutchess County, Pennsylvania, 1860s, 1870s. So she wasn't going to museums. She was not, they had, in her lifetime, a train arrived in town and she could take the train. But when she was a younger woman, she was home. So she might go visiting other neighbors and seeing their rugs and their designs and things they had for design inspiration. But her most common design source to pull from is the Pen Dutch fracture. A fracture is a uniquely Pen Dutch, so German, document that has both text and images, right? And they're filled with hearts and hexes and all kinds of very signature shapes. That's what she pulls from, design-wise. And she hooked the animals that were in the yard, right? So farm animals, dogs, cats, beloved pets. And her most famous, image is this one that's sometimes known as the lollipop bouquet. And I always feel with that, it's a tree with a bunch of circles on it. We always call it lollipop. It does look like lollipop. It reminds me of that Burl Ives song about the lollipop tree, if you ever heard that. It's so cute. But I think what this really is, and it's just my opinion, right? And who can know? But my feeling is that that is not a flowering tree. It is a family tree. Because in fracture work, when you see early Pen Dutch illustrations, you get a bunch of bubbles on a tree where you enter the name of the people. Right, so for me, it's much more likely that this isn't a candy tree, a flowering tree, or anything like that, but it's actually a take on a family tree document. I don't know, but it's the only thing that makes sense for me. So with this one, I drew, I struggled a little bit with her because I wanted something amazingly great and appropriate for such an important rug hooker. And at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about all of the different characters and animals that she liked to put into her work. So I thought, you know what? What if I create a design like the lollipop tree or bouquet, and I have the bubbles, but some of them have the motifs that she often used, right? The Pen Dutch hex. These are actually exactly like the drawings that she used in her rugs. It's not like them. It's like I traced them to be exactly her work. And then she always put a few wacky lamb's tongues around the corner. So this is the design I did for this. And this was hooked by Linda Ann Casau in Western Canada. Do you want to take this around? Yeah, is that an imposition? What a liberty, huh? Thank you. So it was a fun way to show her most...
And you finished it.
This was Linda Ann. She finished it. Yeah. Everybody else finishes their work. So it was a fun way to incorporate both her most famous design and a bunch of her other favorite things, right? Like a little bit of a sampler. And it's, yeah, you're right, it's all hooked in yarn. You know, the Canadian hookers love the yarn, right? It's almost exclusively yarn. So for all of the kits, well, all of the stuff that I sent to Canada, for people who agreed to hook something for me, I always said, do you want me to supply materials, right? So for many of them I did. Many people said, oh, I have so much crap, don't send me anything. But many people said, yeah, send me whatever colors you think. So for her and for all of the Canadians, I sent all yarn, because I know that's what they want. And they don't want the wool strips, that's for sure. She hooked that, but that's a great question. It could equally be punched, but she hooked that. Yeah. So as Anne goes around with that, I'm going to go to our next artist. And I hope that this is somebody you haven't heard of, but maybe you have. The next, yes? Everyone's saying, back in the day, what did they hook on? Well, they hooked on burlap, particularly on a farm, because they were using actually burlap sacks, right? Because that's what they had. Until then, right, because this is when rug hooking comes in. Some people in remote areas might hook into like a homespun that they were, but if they were not weaving and they did not have someone immediately near them producing homespun, they were opening up sacks from the barn. And they could even, for example, to make a hearth rug, put 2 sacks the long way next to each other, right? Because the hearths are these big open cooking hearths, right? Not like our fireplaces. So until burlap begins to be manufactured in India, more like the 1880s, right? So it comes here more like the 1890s. Until then, they're just using feed sacks, grain sacks, anything like that that they can get. And that's why we've lost so many rugs from this period. Now this next artist is really really interesting character. His name is Friedensreich Hundertwasser. He's not American. He's from Vienna. He's born in 1928. He dies in 2000. He actually dies aboard the QE2, the boat. That hardly ever happens, I think, but unluckily for him it did. But, you know, this is an artist who is really wacky and so colorful, so much fun, not out of copyright, right? Still under copyright. So, for example, one of his great quotes, he is one of the early kinds of hippie, extreme activist, right, about not just art and painting, but he had very strong opinions on how everyone should live their lives, right? So we'll get into that, but very, very kind person, barefoot, right? Lots of clues as to his personality. A colorful world is always a synonym for paradise. A gray or monocolored world is also a synonym for purgatory or hell. So in other words, he loves his colors, right? And he sticks with this because look at these crazy colors. This piece is called Blobs Grow in Beloved Gardens, 1975. City Scene. I think this is 74, 64, I can't see. So you can see this is the style he works in. It's extremely colorful. It's very shape-driven. It's very primitive. He was an early utopian. So, you know, and he was a very serious person. That's one of the weird contradictions about his personality. He was a really utopian. He believed in history, but he was also a huge dreamer and idealist. Not a super practical person, very successful in his lifetime, oddly. He was an architect, a famous architect. He was an ecologist, an activist, a teacher, but first he was a painter. That was his first love. He was humorous and serious. He was a man of contradictions. He was creative, but he was very reactive, passionate, easily angry, right? Easily angered and affronted by the world as it was. He was very tolerant, but he was very opinionated. He was a very unusual man. He loved living in cities, but he hated skyscrapers because he loved the humanity, right? He loved the slice of life, but he really believed that everything horizontal belonged to God and everything vertical belonged to man. So he wasn't overly fond of tall buildings unless they had a relationship to the earth. He was born in 1928. He arrived on the art scene in 1950, and this is the height of the abstract expressionist movement. So right, things are going way off the beam at this moment. The Viennese art scene was the most avant-garde anywhere, right? That is the moment. That is the moment art changed. Everything to Hundertwasser felt very contrived. And for that reason, he rejected art in the direction it was going. He completely rejected it. He rejected not just abstract expressionism, but impressionism, cubism, all of those movements. He felt square peg, circle hole. You all are trying too hard. What's really real is the work of children. That they are the closest to the mysteries and the secrets. They have that language, they have the images. And so in his work, he tries to recreate children's drawings. Right? He doesn't have any children, but he tries to recreate children's drawings. He considers them like the gateway to purity. Right? So this is why his work looks the way it does. It's very, very colorful and very, very folky and simple. He is highly trained, but he rejects his training and he works in a much more folky way. As an architect, if you travel to Vienna, and around, his buildings are extraordinary. These are all things he designed in about 200 more buildings. So very unusual leaning towers, Eastern caps, right? Unexpected shapes and colors. He believed in all of the apartment buildings that he built that every person had the right to be able to have part of the outdoors as far as they could reach, right? Even if it didn't have patios, right? Not all apartments had patios, but as far as they could reach, he made sure that they had something built, that they could reach out and keep plants and keep things out there, and that they at least owned that little bit of sky outside their window, even on the 50th floor. So he had a lot of really specific ideas. He was a lead by example person, right? He really didn't hold on to his money. He didn't buy a car. He walked or bicycled. He ate bread. 90% of the time he ate very little but bread. He was not a big drinker. He was a lead by example. But you know, he was very interested in the art scene as a spectator, but he was mostly interested in art from places like Egypt, other parts of like Africa, the Mediterranean, cave paintings. He liked very old, primitive work. That was his taste and his style, and that was what didn't completely repulse him. It is ironic because he was wealthy in his lifetime. So he creates hundreds and hundreds of paintings. He does a lot of work on steamer ships, right? Because he loves traveling by boat and he can afford to, right? So this is another contradiction. But it's kind of ironic. He painted hundreds of paintings from cruise ships, and then he died on a cruise ship. Right? So it is what it is. And then this one down here, I don't think I'm going to get it into focus too easily, but this is actually a painting that Peggy Guggenheim owned, because he drew this, it's a drawing, in her guest book when he went to a party one night. So that's one of her originals. Let me see if I can get it in a little bit better, because my drawing, that's maybe a little bit better. The drawing that I ended up doing for Hundertwasser features characters like this character. He often drew people. So the one that I did, obviously, is this one. And what I was trying to do in my design-like example is show the contradictions, right? This is called the evening commute. So at a comfortable distance is the city, right? Not right there, it's in a comfortable distance. These people are coming home from the city. They are his typical whimsical type characters that he loved to paint. And the houses have this crazy colorful aesthetic, right? Sort of lollipop flowers, super colorful. This, I designed it, but the whole thing was hooked by Shannon Carter in Delaware. And she did all of the colors. So
that's good.
It's a lot of fun. Thank you. I really like this one. And it's a super white pen. I think that's a 9. Yeah, so I dyed colors for her, but she said, give me the brightest colors that you can, because she researched the artists before I sent her the pattern. So people who were signing up for different artists didn't know what the pattern was going to be yet. It's very wide, it's like a 9. I think she did an extraordinary job with that. Okay, so let's look at another artist who, see, the reason I'm putting a lot of artists in who you might not have heard of is because I hope that you love them and that you discover them and you love their work and use it as inspiration, because it's not just the famous 10 artists that we always talk about who did great work, right? It's centuries of interesting artists. Now here comes another one. I think you all probably love Paul Klee. He's always a great favorite. He's always a great favorite. So here's Paul Klee as a young man. My favorite art line is a dot that went for a walk. It's fantastic, isn't it? So Paul Klee, his life is between 1878 and 1904. He is Swiss. That's not right, actually. It's not 1904. I screwed that up. I think it's 19, gosh, I'll check, but it's much later. So he grew up, Paul Klee is a great example of someone who overcame a very tough situation. He grew up with musical parents. He was like a protege violinist as a young child with 2 musician parents. Everybody wanted him to be a musician. And he was kind of moonlighting secretly with his grandmother, who was teaching him to draw and paint. And that was a bit of a secret because his parents had their hearts set on him being a musician. And he was all set to go because he was so good at it. Well, as it turned out, he did want to be an artist. He always had music strongly in his life. It was the soundtrack playing behind him. His issue was, as he decided to go into art school, and he did, and his parents accepted it. When he got into art school, he realized he was very, very good, but he had a terrible color sense, and it was gonna hold him back. It was his Achilles heel. It was like beyond. It was like a peg leg. It was not an Achilles heel. It was like the whole leg. It was bad. So he realized he had a very bad relationship with color, and he questioned whether he should stay in the arts because he felt so unsuccessful at executing his own ideas. So this is how life goes for him for a while. And I'm going to do a spoiler alert, right, because we're in a kind of a abbreviated situation. At the end of his life, he becomes the most famous colorist of all time. His work on color theory is still considered the definitive. Thousands and thousands of pages. He ended up being invited to teach at the Bauhaus in Germany, which is like the top of the art world. And he taught painting in color. So he did figure it out. But he figured it out one year. It was one of these aha moments when he took a trip to Tunisia with 2 of his friends who were both artists, both very young men. He was already secretly engaged. He took a trip to Tunisia, and I'm going to show you the slides out of order. This is what happened. He brought his watercolor pad, and it just clicked, right? The color that he gets with these watercolors, looking at the landscape, traveling around, capturing camels, and it's incredible. It's unique, right? Nobody's doing a color palette like this. And he feels like, I got it. But then he has to figure out, because he's very academic and he's very technical, then he has to figure out, well, how does this translate, right? And then he starts writing about color theory, which he will do for the rest of his life. Thousands and thousands of pages. And the pages look like this. He's technical, right? You know how all of us we're all artists, right? And as rug hookers, right, or anything that you do, we are in parts creative and technical, right? And for those of you who are more technical, you probably like to hook with a really narrow cut. You probably love realism and shading. The more technical you are, the more creative you are, the less you like that stuff. The less the fine part of the craft appeals to you. And you're more like, forget the bliss cutter, forget the B-line, I'm gonna cut with my scissors on the couch, and I'm gonna hook with this, right? I'm gonna hook with this. So all of us in part are technical and creative, and we all, like, just like an old stereo, we all have different levels, right? So for him, he's very creative, but he's probably 50-50 creative technical, because while he's a wonderful artist with a lot of original ideas, it's very important for him to resolve technically the way that colors work. So he ends up writing tons and tons of notebooks that become the baseline to his life's work at the Bauhaus. And he does tons of color studies like this, where he's experimenting with color, not just with a color wheel, right? That's just a small part of it. There's a lot to be said on that, and it's all online, thousands of pages of text. So he works in this very technical way, but he also works in this way. This, to me, right, this is his masterpiece. It's called Fish Magic right here, 1925. But he also does this kind of work. And this, to me, reminds me of, you know when kids draw with a crayon or a crayon, and then they paint black paint over it, and then they do scratch board? Doesn't that remind you of scratch board? Because that's a great way to compose, right? I wrote this in the chapter. If you're trying to design like Paul Klee, it's an idea to make one of those with crayons and paint it over black, because then you don't know as you do your drawing what colors will be revealed, right? That's the fun of it. So he did a lot of this kind of thing, but they didn't have scratch board then, right? But what he did do was, in the absence of having art supplies, because during the First World War, he was recruited, but he was very lucky. His two friends that went to Tunisia with him, both of them had to serve, fighting, front line. One of them was killed immediately. The other one had a lot of hard times and a hard life because of the experiences. Where he was, in Vienna, there was a rule, and this is incredible, but it's true, that if you were an artist, you could be excused from fighting. Because maybe it's not even appropriate anymore, but they thought you didn't have the right temperament to fight, right? Because you were so artistic. So he did not have to actually fight, which he always felt guilty about. But his job during the war was to paint camouflage onto military vehicles. And he did that for years. And as a result, they kept moving him from place to place and town to town, and he didn't always have supplies with him. So sometimes he would just take a broken piece of glass, something like that, and try to, if he had any black paint or ink, paint it black onto glass, and then scratch with like a stick or a pen or whatever he had at that moment. So he did a lot of sketches that are done on glass, and they're just scratched, and they're just sketch ideas. And I think that's the basis for some of the work like this of Paul Klee's that we see. It's very, very unusual. So let me see what else I want to tell you about him. Hold on just a second. Tunisia was the breakthrough. So the color wheel, let's come back to that for just a minute. Because his work after Tunisia was based completely on color. Color became very important to him. And he created a bunch of different color wheels. Now, what's a different color wheel, right? What could be different about a color wheel? It's based on a prism, right, which is a rainbow, and it comes in a certain order and it never changes. Well, it can change, because if you take that one statement, that a color wheel is always in the same order and it's always the same colors, that doesn't have to be true. And that wasn't true for Paul Klee. So for example, let's pretend that you created a color wheel that was based on, for example, your favorite songs, right? Or places that you've been, your favorite vacation places, or your moods, right? You can make a color wheel based on anything, and he did. Because his idea was that if I say the name of a color, right? Say I say like navy blue. What's that for you, right? Is that sad, like a jazz song, right? Or, like for me, blue is happy, because every year when we get to summer vacation on Cape Cod, we come running out of the car and jump into the ponds with our clothes on. And I think of blue as a pond. But maybe you think of blue differently, right? We all have different feelings about different colors that are in part based on our experiences of our life so far. And he understood that. And people used to say, because he'd create different color wheels for his different projects, because he was a musician first, people used to say, who were also musicians, that you could almost look at his paintings and hear a song. Your eye would bounce from piece to piece to piece, and it was almost like a song. And it made sense because his color wheels were often based on music. Just something to think about, right? Because we're very rules-oriented in our lives. There's so many ways that you could create your own color wheel, which is a totally different way of color planning. Now, for Paul Klee, I did the piece, and I did a very small piece. I wanted to work in a different medium, and I worked in mini punch. So this one is very, very small. And I'm going to show you what this is. I struggled a lot with the Paul Klee. I ended up, when we were away for the weekend with my friend Kirsten, who helps me a lot with our Facebook group, and she's a good friend. We were in the pool area, and my kids were off swimming, and I literally put a different project onto my frame, my regular rock cooking frame, but it's on weaver's cloth, and it is a very small mini punch project that's done in colors that I used to like from the 1980s when I grew up, like Swatch watches and Benetton colors and Esprit colors and all these bright Keith Haring type colors. So this is a very small piece, and I'm going to show you. So it is mini punched. It is Russian punched, right? And it's punched in acrylic, very fine acrylic. The basis for the shapes, because Paul Klee was very shape driven, the basis for the shapes comes from this game. This is my daughter. And the game is a Dutch game called Bausack, and it's basically like a Jenga. It's a ball of shapes, but a bag of shapes that you are supposed to stack, but it's almost impossible to stack them because they're all very different. So we play this all the time, and I thought, you know what? This could be my Paul Klee, right? Because it's so shapy. It's like one of his cities. So that's what I ended up doing, but I have to show you. This is the image for the chapter, because I did the image for the chapter, and that's the way that the chapter was done. But while I was working this image, my friend Kirsten did a much better piece. Right? And I'm very glad to say that, because I love this piece. But she did a more traditional Paul Klee piece of her own design. This is her design, Kirsten Gay. So she designs on the computer, which is something I cannot do. But she figures stuff out on the computer, and then I dyed these colors for her, and this is her Paul Klee. So very similar, very shape-driven, and her piece is much larger. So they both will appear in the book. By the way, all of these rugs will be at Sauter Village this coming Sauter, so next August, and a few more. So that is Paul Klee. I think we have. Okay, I'm going to kind of zip up because I don't want to put you to sleep, and I can stop at any time.
Yes.
So the next artist I have is Klimt, and I think he's another great favorite. Hold on just a second. Klimt is certainly another great favorite. So, quote from Klimt: "Truth is like fire. To tell the truth means to glow and burn." Did Klimt ever love things that were glowing and burning, right? All of those crazy metallics, all of that shine, right? Everything looks like a fire. Not everything, actually, because Klimt only did his gold period for 10 years. We associate him with metallics, but it was only 10 years, right? Only 10 years of his life. So here he is with one of his beloved cats, thanks Anne. And this is Hygiena. This is a close-up of one of his murals. He loved public spaces. He did a lot with murals. Joan of Arc, one of his more sort of erotic. He loved eroticism. So he is another artist who is dead serious. His life is between 1886 and 1918. Very, very talented, very, very serious. He actually got a full scholarship at the age of 14 to the equivalent of college, right? So this is like unheard of. This is Vienna. He goes to the Vienna School of Arts and Crafts. He's considered the star pupil. He gets commissions in his teens, right, for like members of like the elite families and college buildings. He's doing tons of murals. I mean, he's unbelievably great. He's very, very serious as a young man. He's a bit wild with women and with drinking, so that part of life he likes and indulges in. But in terms of his art, he's very, very deadpan and serious. He loves architecture. He loves interior design, and you can kind of see that in his work, right? Like Paul Klee, it's very stacked, it's very shape-driven. He loves geometry as much as he loves painting. And interestingly, his dad is a gold engraver. So maybe that's part of the reason why he loves gold so much. Those things probably go together. He loves Renaissance painting, he loves gold. Unfortunately, his father and his brother, who were the two closest people to him, died the same year. And this is when he's in his early 20s. And at that point in his life, that's when he started using the gold, right? Probably because his dad, the metal engraver, just died, and it's like a bit symbolic for him. He wants everything to be gold. He went into a very, very deep depression. And during that time, he had been like literally, no pun intended, the golden child of the art scene, right? He begins the art scene in Vienna. But at that time, he said to himself, with those two important deaths, I am not going to play by the rules anymore. I'm going to go with my heart. I'm going to go with my God. I'm going to do only the things that matter to me. And as a result, he put his foot down on the gas with doing things that were not allowed at that time. So for example, he had a huge commission in one of the academic buildings of the University of Vienna. And he did some full throttle nudes, right? Very Klimt style. And to us now, very benign. But at that time, they didn't hang them, they took them down, and they're believed to have been destroyed, if not at that time during the Second World War. Even academia, right, in their liberalness, would not allow these paintings. And the problem with Klimt was not that his women were nude, right, and men, because nudity is okay. But at this time in art, what is not okay is flesh tone, right? Nudity, okay. But once we get toward, nipples and lips being pink and shaded, not okay, right? Big, big difference. So his work is considered pornography. And he is no longer the golden child. He no longer has work, right? It's like he's already made a ton of money, right, at a very young age. So he does his own thing for the rest of his time. He doesn't do work for public spaces anymore, which was his favorite, working for the opera, working for playhouses, working for university buildings. He doesn't do any of that anymore. He's no longer willing to comply. So he's a really interesting, oh gosh, what's going on here? Whoa, that's kind of scary. Now, as I say, this is all, this is spam, right? This is not real. This is like one of these stupid spam things. So he doesn't just do the style that we know him to do. He also does, hang on, this, right? This is also Klimt, right? All of this stuff that looks more like Seurat, it looks like pointillism, still Klimt, right? So it's, when we say like, I love Klimt, we're usually talking about his gold period of those 10 years. The other decades looked more like this. And it's still beautiful, but he worked in a very different style. When I came to having to, design something for this chapter, I wanted to do something that was more iconic looking than a garden. So, and I wanted to do something very metallic. So I ended up drawing this mermaid, a little bit better, and, dropping in a lot of the Klimt patterning, right? Because he was very, very fine and filigree. He painted everything very, very wild and pattern-driven, very flat. But then he would make just the face of the subject super realistic, right? That's his thing, super realistic. So I drew this and I sent it to Colleen Tiefenthal. Her rug hooking company is called Beechnut Studio. She is in Delaware? Delaware. And this piece is mounted on a board, just so you know. And without even having this conversation about Klimt's technique, she actually created a piece. She's a great painter with 2 cutouts of canvas for the faces. Mm-hmm. And I think this works incredibly well, right? So she was able to put, because she's, her rug hooking brand is very strong, sort of sea themes, mermaid themes, so I think she's the perfect person to do this, but I didn't know she was also a fantastic painter. And it made a lot of sense with this piece. She needed to hook it small because of time, that she would actually paint the faces just like Klimt. So this is Colleen Tiefenthal, Beechnut Studio. And I have one more artist after this.
Very neat.
incidentally,
Can I see
none
that
of the
one?
patterns that you're seeing now are on my website. But for when I do talks like this, and this is, as I say, this is the first time that anyone has seen these rugs, because I literally handed the book in like 3 weeks ago. And I haven't even edited it from Marc at Rug Hooking Magazine yet. But if you are interested in hooking any of these patterns, let me know, and I can put them on linen and send them out next week. And we can talk about that later. I would send them out next Wednesday.
So you don't want anybody to put these on Facebook?
You know, it's okay if they do, because now the book is done.
Okay.
The reason I wasn't talking about it a lot was because I was afraid if I showed a lot of images, people sometimes hijack your work. And I thought before the manuscript is in and it's like done, but I feel better now that the manuscript's in and it's I can date everything clearly. I'm not usually that paranoid, but it's happened a few times. So I have to be a bit savvy once in a while. Now our last artist that we're talking about here, oh wait a minute, I have some close-ups of Klimt. So this is what I'm talking about, gold leaf, tons of gold leaf, and then painted face. And same with Colleen's work, hooking, painted. It's good, isn't it? She was so smart to do it like that. So the last artist of the presentation, and then if you want, I can show you some of the other rugs that people hooked. That are artists that I couldn't, this would be like 6 months long if we covered every artist. So I won't do that. Yeah. Is that your favorite? Yeah. The Mermaids?
Yes.
It's a lot of fun. That design almost works like a playing card, you know. So the last artist of today is probably another artist who you know. This little sweet pea, Maud Lewis. Oh, yes. Now, just to be clear, Maud Lewis's work, right, she's a very iconic Canadian painter, very naive, primitive painter. Her work went out of copyright last January. So if you love her paintings, you can hook them exactly the way they are with nobody's permission. She is out of copyright. But that's not the point of my project. So my project's going to be a little bit different. Maud Lewis's life was between 1903 and 1970. She was born with multiple birth defects, including polio. So she was very hunched over. She was the subject of a lot of ridicule at school, which is actually a weird gift. I keep telling my son this because he's autistic and we have a lot of problems at school. It was actually a gift because if she wasn't ridiculed at school, then she probably would have continued in school, gone to art school, and become a very average painter. But because she didn't go to school, and because it was merciless teasing, she didn't study art. She is one of the rare artists of the 20th century who is completely untainted by any. She didn't know any other artists, right? She didn't know Van Gogh's work. She didn't know any other artists. So her work is very, very pure. It's just a reflection of what she saw in front of her, right? As if she was living at a much earlier time. Her parents died when she was quite young, and she ended up living with an aunt, and that was okay. A little bit of like an evil stepmother kind of situation. It was okay. And she ended up answering an advertisement. She was very visibly, I don't even know what the right word is anymore, but you know what I'm saying, right? She very visibly was different. She could swim, she could do a lot of things, but she looked very different. She answered an ad in the local paper for a housekeeper. And this was with the person who she would end up marrying. His name was Everett. And he had this tiny, tiny, tiny house. One big room down that included the kitchen, and up the ladders to a single bedroom where they shared a very small bed. That was it. So it was one room up, one room down. She answered this advertisement for a housekeeper in order to get away from her aunt, just to have her own life. And nobody wanted her to do it because they thought she was deformed and unable to take care of herself. Well, she did it. She was his housekeeper. She ended up marrying him. And she ended up starting this little business from their little tiny cottage, which was right on the main road. And he was a difficult person. If you know this biography, I'm not going to go into this aspect of it. But a lot of people, particularly Canadians, don't like me talking about him at all because it's believed that he was quite abusive. But a lot of this is also, to be fair, not substantiated. And it was never said by her. And she loved him very much. So whatever the dynamics of their relationship were, there we go, right? So she was very happy in her situation with him. She loved her home. She never wanted to go anywhere different. She never wanted to do anything different. He would go out. Once she started painting, she put a little sign outside her cottage that said paintings for sale, $5. And people stopped, tourists stopped, and she sold tons of paintings. And the dynamic of their relationship changed because she was the breadwinner. And Everett would spend, as an aging man, all of his time. They were very, very thrifty. He would just go down to the docks because it was like a seafaring community, fishing community, and collect the leftover nautical paint that people had, right? Painting their boats, and then a little bit left over, and he would take it home. And that was her paint, right? And people ended up later giving her paint sets, and she's like, I don't want them. I'm happy with the way, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, this was her, right? She was very, this is her quote. This is the only quote I know to be actually her. I paint all from memory. I don't copy much because I don't go nowhere. I just make my own designs up, right? Simple as that. That was just, she reminds me of my grandmother. It's just the way she worked, very, very crowded. They never left her little house, right? Even when they were making money. This is what her designs look like. Very, very simple, very primitive. She would often paint 50 of the same view, right? Places that she could walk to and get to, depending on how she was feeling. She had to hold her paintbrush in a very odd way because her hand really didn't work at all. So this was all very difficult. At a certain point, Everett painted for her. But he copied paintings she had already done, and it's impossible to know the difference. So her work looks like this, very, very simple and primitive. One of the things about her work that is funny and interesting, and people rarely criticize, is the confusion of seasons. And for example, we've got some snow scenes with autumn trees. And you know why this happens? Well, when your entire art supply collection consists of the boat paints that are available yesterday, then you don't have any more colors. And trees are going to be yellow even if it's a winter scene. Right? It's just necessity. She always, when people asked her about this, she never said it's because we don't buy paints. She always used to say, well, it's from my imagination. It's the way I imagined it. Or sometimes she'd say, well, this one spring this did happen. It was like, you know, and so she would always make up different stories to justify it. But she worked like a demon. She could get out 10, 15 paintings in a day, and they would all sell. Every single one of them would sell. It was just remarkable. People loved certain subjects like Fluffy, right? This is a handful. There's hundreds of Fluffies out there. All of her cats in her life, she always kept cats, and every single one of them was named Fluffy. So she loved her cats, and these are all different. They look the same, but they're all different. Painted by Maud, painted by Everett, who knows? It probably doesn't even matter. But yeah, she sold her paintings for $5 each. She did very well in her lifetime. What's that?
Let me see your Fluffy.
Let's see. Yeah, this is my Fluffy. You know, I did a couple of Maud Lewis's. This is the one for the book. I'll resolve the end of that story by saying I think she died in her 60s, so she had quite a long life considering the amount of health problems she had. And sadly, Everett lived to be another almost 20 years more. And unfortunately, he died. This is not a good note to end on, but he died when somebody broke into that little house because they believed there to be money in it, and he fought with the intruder and he killed him. So that's how that ended. Yeah, not a good ending. So this is my Fluffy. So what I wanted to do was create two Fluffies, which I have here. This is hooked by Carol Palat in Wisconsin. This is actually, she hooked it with all yellow ground, but this is actually earth here with flowers, and you can hook it however you want. I'm never precious about how people hook my designs. I'm never precious. So she hooks it as all yellow in the background, and this is actually water. This is Digby, right? This is the seafront where she lived, and this is the view of Digby, which she often painted with the little islands in the distance. So this is my design like this with the two Fluffies like this. And you know, I had done a Maud Lewis before for my first book. So this is one of the designs in my first book. This is a pattern I can never sell because it's one of the patterns in the book that came out in
June, July.
Upside down.
So this is View of Digby, and this is one of the free patterns in my first book. But this is the view as she painted it many times, with some little changes. So we've got two we're looking at now.
That's great.
Thank you. You can actually just pass it as Patrick. It's mine, so I'm not that worried about it. So that's not one in the Design Life book, but that's one from the past. So let me do this.
Something like that one.